The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Westlake Academy, casting long golden rectangles across the polished hallway floor. The light caught specks of dust dancing in the air, temporarily transformed into floating glitter before settling back onto the surface that had just been mopped. The squeaking of rubber-soled shoes against wet floor tiles echoed through the empty corridor as Claire Turner hurried toward the music department, her arms full of sheet music and her mind racing with 1,000 tasks. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight bun that emphasized her sharp features, and her posture spoke of someone who carried importance like a badge. As the head of the music department at one of the most prestigious arts academies in the state, Claire had earned her reputation through years of dedication and undeniable talent. Her students regularly won competitions, and many had gone on to study at Juilliard, Berkeley, and other top music schools. This success was something she reminded herself of daily, especially on mornings like this one when everything seemed to be falling apart. The annual spring showcase was less than 3 weeks away. Their featured soloist had just called in sick with mono. 3 violinists were struggling with the new piece, and somehow the lighting crew had double-booked the auditorium for rehearsals. Perfect, Claire muttered to herself, nearly missing the yellow caution sign as she rounded the corner. Her foot hit the slick floor, and for a heart-stopping moment, she felt herself losing balance. The sheet music in her arms began to slip. Just as disaster seemed inevitable, a steady hand caught her elbow, stabilizing her before she could fall. "Careful there," said a deep, calm voice. "Floor's still wet." Claire steadied herself and looked up to see an older man in a gray maintenance uniform. He was tall with broad shoulders that stooped slightly forward, as if he'd spent years bending to fit into spaces made for smaller people. His face was weathered but kind, with lines that suggested he smiled often. Gray peppered his dark hair and beard, and his eyes, surprisingly bright and alert, seemed to take in everything at once. "I can see that," Claire said, more sharply than she'd intended, embarrassment making her voice tight. "Perhaps the sign should be more visible." She nodded toward the caution sign, which was perfectly visible to anyone who wasn't racing around a corner while distracted. The man didn't seem bothered by her tone. "You're probably right about that." He smiled, revealing a small gap between his front teeth. "I'm Ray, by the way. Started working here last month." Claire glanced at the name embroidered on his uniform, R. Wilson, and gave a quick nod, already shifting her attention to reorganizing the scattered papers in her arms. She didn't have time for small talk with maintenance staff. "Not today. Need help with those?" Ray gestured toward the music sheets that were threatening to spill again. "No, thank you. I've got it," Claire said curtly, though it was clear she was struggling. Ray nodded and took a step back, respecting her space. His eyes fell on one of the sheets that had fallen to the floor, a complex piano arrangement. "Ah, Rachmaninoff," he said, recognition lighting his face. "Concerto No. 2? Beautiful piece." Claire paused, genuinely surprised. Most people couldn't identify classical pieces at a glance, let alone maintenance staff. She looked at him more carefully. "You know Rachmaninoff?" "Just a bit," Ray said with a small shrug. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something deeper, that disappeared as quickly as it had come. "Used to listen to classical music years ago." A group of students rounded the corner, chattering loudly. They fell silent when they saw Claire, offering respectful good mornings as they passed. Their eyes slid over Ray as if he were invisible, part of the building itself rather than a person. "Mrs. Turner, do you want us to set up the practice room for today's rehearsal?" asked one of the students, a girl with a violin case slung over her shoulder. "Yes, Lily. And please make sure the piano has been tuned. I left a note last week, but it still sounded flat yesterday." "I took care of that piano this morning," Ray offered. "Should be all set now." Claire turned to him with raised eyebrows. "You tune pianos too?" There was a hint of skepticism in her voice that made several students exchange glances. Ray's smile remained, but it no longer reached his eyes. "I know my way around instruments," he said simply. One of the boys in the group snickered quietly. "Jack of all trades, master of none." he whispered to another student, not quite quietly enough. Ray heard it. Claire could tell by the slight stiffening of his shoulders, but he didn't react. Instead, he turned back to his mop and bucket. "Should finish up here before more students arrive," he said. "Don't want anyone else slipping." Claire felt a twinge of something uncomfortable in her chest but pushed it aside. She had a department to run, a showcase to save, and countless other responsibilities that demanded her attention. "Well, thank you for the piano," she said, her tone professional but distant, "and for the catching." She gestured vaguely to where she'd almost fallen. "Just doing my job," Ray replied, resuming his mopping with smooth, practiced strokes. Claire turned to follow her students but paused when she heard Ray humming quietly to himself. It was the melody from the second movement of the Rachmaninoff, perfectly in tune and with the kind of nuance that suggested more than casual familiarity. For a brief moment she almost turned back, almost asked. But then her phone buzzed with another problem requiring her immediate attention, and the moment passed. "Mrs. Turner, we need you in the auditorium," Lily called from down the hall. "Mr. Patel is asking about the program changes." "Coming," Claire replied, hurrying away without a backward glance. The day spiraled into controlled chaos from there. 3 back-to-back classes, an emergency meeting about the showcase, a heated discussion with the school principal about budget allocations for new instruments. By lunch, Claire had forgotten about the morning encounter entirely. The teacher's lounge was unusually crowded when she entered, carrying her salad and a stack of compositions to grade. The only available seat was at a small table near the window, across from Beth Chen, the art teacher, who was deep in conversation with the new history teacher. "Mind if I join you?" Claire asked, already setting down her things. "Not at all," Beth smiled, moving her colorful tote bag to make room. "We were just talking about the new maintenance man. Have you met him yet?" Claire paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Ray?" "Briefly this morning, why?" "Nothing really," Beth said, stirring her soup. "Just that he seems, I don't know, different?" "Different how?" Claire asked, only half interested as she began marking a student's composition. The history teacher, whose name Claire couldn't remember, leaned forward. "I found him reading a book of poetry in the boiler room yesterday, in Greek. Original Greek, not a translation." "Ancient Greek?" Claire asked, her attention finally caught. "Modern, I think," the history teacher said. "Still, not exactly light reading for breaks between fixing toilets and changing light bulbs." Beth nodded. "And yesterday he was helping one of my struggling students understand perspective drawing better than I could explain it. Started talking about vanishing points and the mathematics of visual perception. The man clearly has an education." Claire said non-committally. "Well, there are many reasons someone might end up in a job that doesn't match their education level." "True," Beth agreed. "I just wonder what his story is." "Maybe he just likes mopping floors," Claire said with a small laugh. She immediately regretted her flippant tone when she saw Beth's expression. "That's beneath you, Claire," Beth said quietly. Claire felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't mean Mrs. Turner." A panicked voice interrupted their conversation as Lily burst into the lounge looking distraught. "There's water all over the floor in the practice room. The ceiling's leaking right above the baby grand." Claire shot to her feet, lunch forgotten. "What? Since when?" "Just now. The pipes." Claire didn't wait to hear more. She rushed out of the lounge and down the hall, Lily running alongside her. When they reached the practice room, several students were already there, frantically trying to move the expensive piano away from the growing puddle on the floor. Water dripped steadily from a discolored patch on the ceiling. "Careful. Don't scratch the finish," Claire warned as the students struggled with the heavy instrument. "Has anyone called maintenance?" "I did," one boy said. "They said they'd send someone right away." As if on cue, Ray appeared in the doorway, toolbox in hand. He surveyed the scene quickly, his expression shifting from concern to focused determination. "Everyone step back from the piano," he said, his voice carrying a natural authority that surprised Claire. The students obeyed immediately. Ray moved with unexpected grace for a man his size, quickly positioning himself to examine the leak, while simultaneously directing two older boys to help him cover the piano with the tarp he'd brought. "It's the radiator pipe above," he explained as he worked. "Building this old, it happens. I can fix it, but I'll need to shut off the water to this section first." "But we need this room for rehearsals today," Claire protested. "The showcase." "Would you rather have a broken piano?" Ray asked, not unkindly but directly. "This won't take long, but it needs to be done now before more damage occurs." Claire wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by support staff. She opened her mouth to assert her authority, then closed it again as she realized he was right. "Fine," she conceded. "How long?" 2 hours tops, Ray promised. Maybe less. As the students filed out of the room, Claire overheard one whisper to another, "Bet he doesn't even know which end of the wrench to use. My dad says most of these janitors are just—" "That's enough, Jason," Claire cut in sharply, surprising herself. "Mr. Wilson is trying to help." The boy looked appropriately chastised, but as Claire turned away, she caught Ray's expression. There was no gratitude for her intervention, only a quiet dignity and perhaps a hint of resignation, as if he'd heard such comments too many times to be bothered anymore. Something about that look stayed with Claire as she reorganized the days, rehearsals, and dealt with disgruntled students. It wasn't anger or offense that she'd seen in his eyes. It was something more complex. Something that made her wonder, just as Beth had, what Ray Wilson's story might be, and why a man who could recognize Rachmaninoff at a glance and read Greek poetry was fixing pipes and mopping floors at Westlake Academy. 2 weeks had passed since the pipe incident, and Claire Turner was exhausted. The spring showcase was now just days away, and despite her best efforts, things kept going wrong. Their replacement soloist had backed out due to a family emergency, the programs had been printed with the wrong date, and 3 of her students had come down with a stomach bug that was making its way through the school. Tonight, she'd stayed late, long after the last student had gone home. The empty auditorium offered a rare moment of peace amidst the chaos of preparation. Claire sat at the grand piano on stage, the single spotlight above creating a perfect circle of light around her. Her fingers moved across the keys as she played, a piece she'd composed years ago but had never performed publicly. It was different from the classical pieces she taught, more raw, with a melancholy that revealed parts of herself she rarely showed to others. The music echoed in the empty space, filling the darkness with emotion that had nowhere else to go. When the last note faded, Claire let her hands rest in her lap. The silence that followed felt heavy, like a held breath. That was beautiful. Claire jumped, her heart racing as she squinted into the darkness beyond the stage. "Who's there?" "Sorry. Didn't mean to startle you." Ray stepped into the edge of the light, a broom in his hand. "I was cleaning the back rows, didn't want to interrupt." Claire straightened her back, embarrassment making her voice sharper than intended. "I thought everyone had gone home." "Night shift," Ray explained simply, gesturing to his uniform. "The school doesn't clean itself." Claire nodded, gathering her sheet music and placing it carefully in her leather folder. She felt strangely vulnerable, as if Ray had walked in on her doing something far more private than playing piano. "Was that one of yours?" Ray asked, taking a few steps closer to the stage. "The piece you were playing?" Claire hesitated. Few people knew she composed. It was a private passion she'd set aside years ago when teaching and administration had taken over her life. "Yes," she admitted finally. "Just something old I was revisiting." Ray nodded, his expression thoughtful. It had a story to it. Something about longing, maybe? Or remembering. Claire stared at him, surprised by the accuracy of his observation. The piece had been written after her mother died, a way to process grief she hadn't been able to express any other way. "Both, I suppose," she said quietly, then cleared her throat and stood. "I should be going. It's late." Ray stepped back, giving her space. "Of course, don't let me keep you." Claire gathered her things and made her way down the steps. From the stage. As she passed Ray, she paused. "You seem to know a lot about music for—" She trailed off, realizing too late how the words would sound. For a janitor, Ray finished with no particular edge to his voice. Claire felt her cheeks warm. I didn't mean... It's all right, Ray said. Most people have the same thought. An awkward silence fell between them. Claire should have just nodded and continued on her way, but something made her stay. How do you know so much about music? She asked finally. Ray leaned slightly on his broom. I used to play, long time ago. Piano? He nodded. Professionally? Small smile touched the corners of his mouth. In another life. Before Claire could ask what he meant, the sound of her phone ringing cut through the quiet auditorium. She fumbled in her bag to silence it, seeing the school principal's name on the screen. I need to take this, she said. Ray nodded and turned back to his work. Good night, Mrs. Turner. Claire answered the call as she walked away, already focusing on the next crisis that needed her attention. By the time she reached her car, she'd forgotten about the brief exchange entirely. The next evening found Claire once again at the school after hours, this time by accident. She'd left a crucial folder in her classroom and had to return for it, knowing she'd need those notes to finalize the showcase program that night. The school halls were eerily quiet. Most of the lights had been turned off, leaving only the security, lighting to guide her way. She moved quickly, wanting to retrieve her folder and leave. As she approached the music wing, a sound stopped her in her tracks. Someone was playing the piano, not just playing, but playing with the kind of skill and emotional depth that made her breath catch. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful pieces ever written for piano, and one of the most difficult to play with true feeling rather than just technical skill. Whoever was playing wasn't just hitting the right notes. They were making the piano sing with joy and weep with sorrow all at once. Claire followed the music, moving quietly down the hallway toward the small practice room at the end. The door was partially open, a sliver of light spilling out. She approached, slowly, not wanting to interrupt whoever was creating such magic. Peering through the crack in the door, Claire felt her world shift on its axis. Ray sat at the old upright piano, his back to the door, his large hands moving across the keys with an astonishing mix of power and delicacy. His eyes were closed, his body swaying slightly with the music. The gray uniform he wore seemed to fade away in Claire's vision, replaced by the unmistakable presence of a true artist, lost in his craft. Claire stood frozen, unable to move or even breathe properly. The music washed over her, revealing layers of emotion and technical brilliance she rarely heard outside of professional concerts. This wasn't someone who used to play. This was someone who lived and breathed music at the highest level. As Ray approached the piece's conclusion, his fingers dancing through the final complicated runs with effortless grace, Claire found herself holding back tears. The last notes hung in the air like stars, bright and perfect in their placement. In the silence that followed, Ray's shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. He kept his hands on the keys for a moment longer, as if reluctant to break the spell. Then slowly he closed the piano lid and stood. Claire stepped back quickly, not wanting to be caught spying. Her heel hit the wall behind her with a soft thud. Ray turned, his eyes finding her immediately. Mrs. Turner. Claire stepped forward, no longer able to hide. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I forgot something in my classroom and heard the music. Ray said nothing, his expression unreadable. That was... Claire struggled to find words adequate to what she'd just witnessed. That was extraordinary. Ray looked down at his hands, then back at her. Thank you. You said you used to play, but that wasn't just used to play. That was... She gestured helplessly. Who are you, Ray? A sad smile crossed his face. Just the maintenance man, Mrs. Turner. No. Claire shook her head firmly. No one plays like that without years of professional training and natural talent. That was conservatory level at the very least. Ray was quiet for a moment, looking around the small practice room with its scuffed floors and water-stained ceiling tiles. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, but clear. I was a concert pianist, in my country, before I came here. Claire's Mind raced, trying to process this revelation. Where? When? Does it matter now? Ray asked, not unkindly. He reached for the dust cloth he'd placed on top of the piano and began wiping down the already clean surface. The gesture seemed to be more about having something to do with his hands than actual cleaning. Of course it matters, Claire insisted. With that kind of talent, why are you… She stopped herself, but it was too late. Why am I mopping floors and fixing leaky pipes? Ray finished for her, no anger in his voice, just a quiet resignation. Life doesn't always go as planned, Mrs. Turner. Claire felt ashamed of her question. I'm sorry, that was thoughtless of me. Ray shook his head. It's what everyone wonders. No need to apologize for asking what others just think. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Would you play something else? Claire asked finally, surprising herself with the request. Ray looked equally surprised. Now, if you don't mind. Claire gestured to the piano. It's been a long time since I've heard playing like that. Ray hesitated, then slowly sat back down at the piano. Any requests? Claire thought for a moment. Whatever you love most. Ray's hands hovered over the keys, and for a brief moment, Claire saw a flicker of pain cross his face. Then his expression cleared, and he began to play. This time it was Debussy's. Claire de Lune? The notes floating in the air like moonlight on water. Claire leaned against the doorframe and closed her eyes, letting the music wash away the stress and worries that had been weighing her down. In that moment, the teacher and the janitor disappeared. There was only the music and two people who understood, its power to transcend all boundaries between them. The final notes of Claire de Lune faded into silence, leaving the small practice room feeling larger somehow, as if the music had pushed back the walls. Claire stood perfectly still, afraid that even breathing might break the spell that Ray's playing had cast. When she finally opened her eyes, Ray was watching her, his hands resting lightly on the keys. That was… Claire shook her head, words failing her. Thank you, Ray said simply, closing the piano lid with a gentleness that spoke of deep respect for the instrument. Claire stepped fully into the room now, no longer hovering in the doorway. How long has it been since you performed? Professionally, I mean. Ray's eyes flickered to the wall clock, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. About 6 minutes. Claire couldn't help but laugh. The sound surprised her. She hadn't laughed genuinely in longer than she could remember. Certainly not in this building, where every interaction was colored by her professional persona. You know what I mean, she said, taking a seat on a nearby chair. Ray's smile faded. He looked down at his hands, work-roughened now but still capable of such extraordinary beauty. 7 years. 7 years, Claire repeated softly. May I ask why you stopped? Ray was quiet for so long that Claire thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of old pain. I didn't have a choice, he said. I left my country rather suddenly. The situation there was becoming dangerous for people like me. People like you. People who spoke out against the wrong things. Who knew the wrong people. Ray shrugged, as if this were a small matter, and not something that had clearly altered the course of his life. Music became political, as everything does eventually. My last concert included a piece by a composer who had fallen out of favor with the government. Claire listened, trying to imagine what that must have been like, to lose not just a career but a homeland and identity. And when you came here? When I came here, I was grateful just to be safe, Ray said. I didn't speak the language well. I had no credentials that would transfer easily. I had a family to support. He gestured to his uniform. This job has good benefits. My daughter needed medical insurance more than she needed a father with an impressive title. Your daughter? She's fine now, Ray said quickly. The doctors here were excellent, but those first years were difficult. Claire nodded, suddenly understanding why someone with Ray's extraordinary talent would be mopping floors and fixing pipes. And you never tried to get back into music? Teaching, perhaps, or… I play, Ray interrupted gently. Every day I play. Just not for audiences anymore. Until tonight, Claire said. Until tonight, Ray agreed with a small smile. The school's ancient heating system suddenly clanked and groaned, breaking the moment. Ray stood, straightening his uniform. I should finish my rounds, he said. The night supervisor checks at 11. Claire glanced at the clock. It was already past 10. Of course, I need to get home as well. She rose from her chair but hesitated before leaving. Ray, would you? She stopped, reconsidering. Would I what? He prompted. Claire shook her head. Nothing. It was a silly thought. Ray waited, patient and unassuming. It's just, our showcase soloist backed out and we haven't found a replacement, Claire said in a rush. But you wouldn't be interested. It was just a passing thought. Something flashed in Ray's eyes. Interest? Alarm? Claire couldn't quite read it. I'm not a performer anymore, he said after a moment. I understand, Claire said quickly. It was presumptuous of me to suggest it. They walked together out of the practice room and down the darkened hallway. The silence between them felt different now, not awkward but thoughtful. At the main entrance, they paused. Good night, Ray, Claire said. And thank you for sharing your music. Ray nodded. Good night, Mrs. Turner. Claire, she said suddenly. Please call me Claire. A genuine smile spread across Ray's face, transforming his features. Good night, Claire. The next morning, Claire arrived at school with a new energy. She'd barely slept, her mind buzzing. With what she had discovered about Ray, and with half-formed plans she wasn't sure she should pursue. As she unlocked her classroom door, Beth Chen appeared beside her, coffee in hand. You look different today, Beth observed. Good different. Did something happen? Claire hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should share what she had learned about Ray. It felt like a confidence somehow, though he hadn't sworn her to secrecy. I'm just excited about the showcase, she said instead. Despite all the setbacks, Beth raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Speaking of the showcase, any luck finding a replacement soloist? The principal was asking me yesterday. Claire sighed. Not yet. I've called everyone I know, but it's such short notice. Beth took a sip of her coffee. What about that former student of yours, the one who went to Juilliard? Brian? He's in Europe right now. Some prestigious masterclass. Claire set her bag on her desk and began organizing the day's materials. Well, I'm sure you'll think of something, Beth said. You always do. She checked her watch. I'd better get to my classroom. First period starts in 20 minutes. After Beth left, Claire sat at her desk, staring out the window at the morning light filtering through the trees. Her thoughts kept returning to Ray and his music, the way his whole being had seemed to transform when he played, as if he became the music itself. An idea began to take shape in her mind. A risky, potentially disastrous idea that could either save the showcase or become the biggest professional embarrassment of her career. Claire spent the morning teaching her classes on autopilot, her thoughts elsewhere. When lunch period arrived, she made a decision. Instead of heading to the teacher's lounge, she made her way to the maintenance department in the school's basement. The supervisor, a gruff man named Frank, looked up in surprise when she entered. Can I help you, Mrs. Turner? I'm looking for Ray Wilson, Claire said. Is he working today? Frank checked a schedule on the wall. He's on the second floor, fixing the science lab sink that the chemistry students clogged. Again. He shook his head. That man can fix anything, I swear. Best hire we've made in years. Claire thanked him and headed up to the science wing. She found Ray in the empty lab, his head beneath a sink, tools spread out methodically on a towel beside him. Ray? She called softly. There was a muffled thud and a mild curse as Ray apparently hit his head in surprise. He slid out from under the sink, a wrench in one hand and a questioning look on his face. Claire, he said, sitting up. Is everything all right? I need to talk to you, Claire said, closing the classroom door behind her. About last night, about your playing. Ray set down the wrench and stood, wiping his hands on a rag. I thought we covered that pretty thoroughly. We did, Claire agreed, but I can't stop thinking about it. About the waste of it. A shadow crossed Ray's face. I told you I still play. It's not wasted. That's not what I meant, Claire said quickly. I meant the waste of your gift. The world should hear you play, Ray. People should know what you can do. Ray shook his head. That part of my life is over. Why? Because of circumstances you didn't choose? Because of bad luck? Claire took a step closer. What if you had a chance to play again? Not to go back to your old life, but to share your music here now? Claire, just hear me out, she pressed. Our soloist for the spring showcase canceled. We need someone extraordinary to make the event successful. The school needs this fundraiser to work. The arts budget depends on it. Ray looked at her for a long moment. You're asking me to perform? Yes, Claire said simply. One night. One piece. For the students. For the school. Ray turned away, leaning against the lab counter. I haven't performed in public in 7 years. I'm out of practice. What I heard last night wasn't out of practice, Claire said. It was magnificent. The parents, the donors, they're expecting a professional, someone with credentials, a name. They're expecting beauty, Claire countered. Talent, passion, which you have in abundance. Ray was quiet, his expression unreadable. Will you at least think about it? Claire asked. Ray sighed deeply. I'll think about it. That's all I can promise. Claire nodded, knowing it was the best she could hope for at the moment. That's all I'm asking. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Soon students would be flooding back into the hallways. I should go, Claire said. Thank you for considering it. As she turned to leave, Ray called after her. Why? Claire paused at the door. Why what? Why ask me? This showcase is important to you, to your reputation. Why take a risk on the janitor? Claire considered the question carefully. Because when you played last night, you weren't the janitor. You were an artist. And I believe in giving artists the stage they deserve. Ray's expression softened. Even if it means risking your professional standing. Some things matter more than job titles, Claire said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. I'm learning that rather late, I'm afraid. As she walked back to her classroom, Claire wondered if she had made a mistake. If Ray refused, or worse, agreed but then couldn't perform to the level she needed, the showcase could be a disaster. The principal might question her judgment. Parents might complain. But then she remembered the way Ray's hands had moved across the keys, creating sounds that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. And she knew, whatever happened, that she had made the right choice. 3 days passed with no word from Ray. Claire tried not to let her disappointment show as she went about preparing for the showcase, rearranging the program to work without a featured soloist. She didn't seek Ray out again, believing that pressuring him would only push him further away from the idea of performing. During a rehearsal with the student orchestra, Claire found herself constantly glancing toward the auditorium doors, hoping to see Ray appear with an answer. But he didn't come, and the rehearsal ended on a flat note, the students sensing their teacher's distraction. Mrs. Turner? Lily approached the piano where Claire sat reviewing sheet music after the other students had left. Is everything okay? You seem worried. Claire managed a reassuring smile. Just showcase jitters, Lily. Nothing to worry about. Lily nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. My mom says the fundraiser last year paid for all the new violins. She's on the parents' committee. That's right, Claire confirmed. The showcase is our biggest fundraiser of the year, so it's important that it goes well, Lily concluded. For the music program. Claire closed her sheet music. It is. But we have talented students, a good program, and supportive parents. We'll be fine. As Lily gathered her belongings to leave, she hesitated. Mrs. Turner, is Mr. Wilson going to be our soloist for the showcase? Claire's head snapped up. What makes you ask that? Lily's cheeks flushed. I was staying late to practice last week, and I heard someone playing the piano in the small practice room. I thought it was you at first, but when I peeked in, she trailed off. looking slightly guilty at the admission of eavesdropping. You saw Mr. Wilson, Claire finished for her. Lily nodded. He was playing Liszt. My brother studies it at the conservatory, so I recognized it. Mr. Wilson plays better than my brother. She said this matter-of-factly, without a trace of the condescension Claire had heard from other students when discussing the maintenance staff. He does play beautifully, Claire acknowledged, curious about Lily's reaction. Would it bother you if a member of the maintenance staff was our showcase? Soloist? Lily looked genuinely confused by the question. Why would that bother me? If he plays like that, he should be performing, not fixing things. Out of the mouths of babes, Claire thought. I asked him to perform, she admitted, but he hasn't given me an answer yet. Maybe he's scared, Lily suggested. My brother says he still gets stage fright before big performances. Maybe, Claire agreed, touched by the girl's insight. After Lily left, Claire remained at the piano, playing absent-mindedly. As she thought about what the student had said, perhaps Ray was afraid, not just of performing after so many years, but of changing how people saw him, of disrupting the life he had built here. A soft knock on the auditorium door interrupted her thoughts. Claire looked up to see Ray standing, in the entrance, still in his work uniform, a thoughtful expression on his face. You're working late again, he observed, walking slowly toward the stage. Showcase preparations, Claire explained. How much did you hear? Enough, Ray admitted. Your student seems wise beyond her years. Claire smiled. Lily's very perceptive and talented. Ray stopped at the edge of the stage, looking up at Claire at the piano. I've been thinking about your offer. Claire's heart beat faster, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. And? Ray took a deep breath. I'll do it. For a moment, Claire couldn't speak, surprised despite having been the one to make the request in the first place. Really? You? Will? Ray nodded, a mix of determination and apprehension in his eyes. On 2 conditions. Name them, Claire said quickly. First, I choose the piece I play. Of course, Claire agreed immediately. What's the second condition? No one knows who I am until I walk on stage, Ray said firmly. No announcements beforehand, no name in the program. I want people to hear the music before they see the janitor. Claire understood at once. You want them to listen without prejudice? Yes, Ray said simply. Agreed, Claire said. Though I'll need to tell the principal something. He'll want to know who our replacement soloist is. Ray considered this. Tell him you found someone, but you want it to be a surprise, a special guest. Claire nodded, already imagining how to handle the conversation with the principal. What will you play? Rachmaninoff, Ray said after a moment. Piano concerto, no. To the second movement, Claire raised her eyebrows. It was an ambitious choice, particularly without orchestral backing. We only have the piano, not an orchestra. I know, Ray said. But it's the piece I need to play. For me. Something in his voice told Claire this wasn't just a musical choice, but a deeply personal one. Then that's what you'll play. Ray smiled, relief evident in his expression. Thank you. No, Claire said, stepping down from the stage to stand on equal footing with him. Thank you for taking this risk. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Claire handled the logistics of the showcase while Ray practiced late at night when the school was empty. She arranged for the grand piano to be tuned professionally and secured him access to the auditorium after hours. The principal had been skeptical about the mystery soloist, but eventually agreed when Claire assured him that the performance would be memorable. She felt a twinge of guilt at keeping Ray's identity secret, but reminded herself that it was temporary. On the night of the showcase, everyone would know the truth. The evening before the event, Claire found Ray in the auditorium, sitting at the piano but not playing, his hands resting on the closed lid. Having second thoughts? She asked, sliding onto the bench beside him. Second, third, and fourth, Ray admitted with a rueful smile. What if I've forgotten how to perform for an audience? What if my hands freeze? What if you're brilliant and everyone is amazed? Claire countered. What if this is the beginning of something new for you? Ray looked down at his hands. I've made peace with my life as it is now. This risks that peace. Claire understood suddenly that for Ray, the fear wasn't just about performing poorly. It was about stirring up hopes and dreams he'd carefully put to rest. About disrupting the balance he'd found in his new life. You don't have to do this, she said softly. We can find another solution for the showcase. Ray was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he opened the piano lid and placed his fingers on the keys. No, he said finally. Music isn't meant to stay hidden. He began to play. Not Rachmaninoff this time, but a simple, tender melody that Claire didn't recognize. It might have been a lullaby from his homeland, or perhaps something he had composed himself. The notes were gentle but carried a quiet strength, like a river flowing steadily beneath a calm surface. Claire closed her eyes and listened, understanding that this was Ray's way of answering, not with words but with the language that came most naturally to him. When the last note faded, Ray closed the lid gently. I'll see you tomorrow night, he said. The evening of the showcase arrived with all the typical last-minute chaos such events entail. The auditorium was filled to capacity with parents, donors, school board members, and students. The principal, dressed in his best suit, was greeting important guests in the lobby. Claire, in an elegant black dress she rarely had occasion to wear, was backstage ensuring that everything was ready. The student performances went smoothly. The orchestra played well, the choir hit all their notes, and the solo performances by the most talented students showed the strength of the music program. Throughout it all, Claire kept glancing at her watch, wondering where Ray was. They had agreed he would arrive separately, coming in through the stage door to avoid being seen by the audience before his performance. As the penultimate performance concluded, Claire felt a rising panic. Ray was supposed to be the finale, the highlight of the evening, and there was still no sign of him. She excused herself and hurried to the stage door, pushing it open to peer outside into the darkness. Relief flooded through her when she saw Ray walking toward her. He was nearly unrecognizable. Gone was the gray maintenance uniform, replaced by a simple but elegant black suit. His hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed. He looked every inch the concert pianist he had once been. I was beginning to worry, Claire admitted as she held the door for him. Sorry, Ray said. It took longer than I expected to get ready. It's been a while since I wore anything but a uniform. Claire smiled. You look very distinguished. Ray tugged at his collar self-consciously. I feel like an imposter. You're not, Claire said firmly. This is who you've always been. The uniform was the disguise, not this. Inside, they could hear the principal's voice as he addressed the audience, thanking them for their support and explaining how important the fundraiser was for the school's arts programs. And now, the principal was saying, Mrs. Turner has arranged a special surprise to conclude our evening, a guest soloist whose identity has been kept secret until now. Claire touched Ray's arm lightly. That's your cue. Are you ready? Ray took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. No, he said honestly. Then he smiled, a sudden brightness in his eyes. But I'm going to play anyway. The spotlight hit the empty piano on stage, creating a pool of golden light that seemed to wait expectantly. The audience fell silent, their murmurs of curiosity fading as the principal stepped aside from the microphone. Claire squeezed Ray's hand once before he stepped from the wings onto the stage. She held her breath, watching him walk with measured steps toward the piano. From her vantage point backstage, she could see the confusion on the faces of those who recognized him, parents who had passed him in the hallways without a second glance, teachers who had worked alongside him for months without really seeing him, students who had barely acknowledged his existence. Ray didn't look at the audience as he approached the piano. He simply adjusted the bench, sat down, and placed his hands on the keys with the quiet confidence of someone returning home after a long journey. For a moment, nothing happened. Ray closed his eyes, and Claire could see his chest rise and fall, with a deep breath. The silence in the auditorium became heavier, tense with anticipation and confusion. Then Ray began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 floated through the auditorium, gentle at first, like raindrops on still water. Claire watched as Ray's body relaxed into the music, his hands moving with the fluid grace of someone who had never stopped being what he truly was, an artist. As the piece progressed, the music grew in complexity and emotion. Ray's fingers danced across the keys with both power and delicacy, drawing sounds from the piano that seemed almost impossible, sounds that spoke of loss and longing, of memory and hope, of pain transformed into beauty. Claire glanced at the audience. The confusion on their faces had given way to something else, wonder. They were leaning forward in their seats, completely captivated. The principal stood with his mouth slightly open, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. Lily, sitting in the front row with the other music students, was smiling with quiet pride, as if she had known all along what was about to happen. Beth Chen, who had stopped beside Claire to watch from the wings, whispered, "My God, that's the maintenance, man." "No," Claire said softly. "That's Ray Wilson, concert pianist." On stage, Ray had surrendered completely to the music. His face reflected every nuance of the piece, the struggle, the beauty, the journey from darkness into light. It was as if he were telling his own story through Rachmaninoff's notes, sharing parts of himself he had kept hidden for years. When he reached the most tender section of the movement, Claire felt tears prick her eyes. The melody seemed to float above the auditorium like a prayer so pure and honest that it made her chest ache. She had heard this piece performed by famous pianists in grand concert halls, but never like this. Never with this raw emotional truth. Looking around, Claire saw she wasn't the only one moved to tears. Several audience members were dabbing at their eyes. Lily's mother had her hand pressed to her heart. Even the school board president, a notoriously stern man, was blinking rapidly and clearing his throat. As Ray approached the final section of the movement, his playing became somehow both more powerful and more intimate. The music swelled, filling the auditorium with a sound so rich and complex that it seemed impossible it was coming from just one instrument, one man. Then, as the final notes faded into silence, Ray's hands stilled on the keys. He remained motionless, head bowed as if reluctant to break the spell. For one breathless moment, the auditorium was completely silent. Then the applause began, tentative at first, then building into a roar. People rose to their feet, clapping wildly, some calling bravo. Lily was jumping up and down, her face alight with excitement. The principal looked dazed, clapping automatically while staring at Ray as if seeing a ghost. Ray finally looked up, seeming almost surprised to find an audience there. He stood and gave a small, dignified bow. The applause grew even louder. Claire stepped onto the stage and approached the microphone. The audience quieted somewhat, though many remained standing. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I have the honor of introducing our soloist, Mr. Ray Wilson." Ray joined her at the microphone, visibly moved by the reception. "Some of you," Claire continued, "may recognize Mr. Wilson as a member of our maintenance staff. What you may not know is that he was once one of the most celebrated concert pianists in his home country, before circumstances brought him to America and to our school." Murmurs rippled through the audience, people turning to whisper to each other, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and embarrassment. "Tonight," Claire said, "we've all had the privilege of being reminded that extraordinary talent can be found in the most unexpected places, sometimes right in front of us, if only we take the time to truly see the people around us." She stepped back, giving Ray the microphone. He hesitated, then spoke in a voice that was quiet but clear. "Thank you for listening, really listening," he said simply. "Music has always been my true voice. Tonight, for the first time in many years, I feel heard." The applause that followed was deafening. People continued to stand, some wiping tears from their eyes, others smiling broadly. Lily's mother was whispering urgently to the parent beside her, the head of the fundraising committee, Claire realized. As Ray returned to the piano for an encore, a hauntingly beautiful piece from his homeland that no one in the audience had heard before, but that moved them nonetheless. Claire caught the principal's eye from across the stage. He gave her a nod of approval and something more: respect. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. After the performance, donors surrounded Ray, asking about his background, his training, his story. Suddenly, the janitor they had barely noticed was the center of attention, receiving the recognition his talent had always deserved. The fundraising committee chair approached Claire during the reception, practically bubbling with excitement. "This is the most successful showcase we've ever had," she said. "The donations are still coming in, but we've already surpassed last year's total. Several major donors have specifically asked if Mr. Wilson would be willing to give private recitals." Claire smiled, watching Ray across the room. He was speaking with Lily and several other music students, gesturing to explain something about technique, his face animated in a way she had never seen before. "I think you'd have to ask him," Claire said. "His life might be changing after tonight." The following Monday, Claire arrived at school earlier than usual. The showcase had been the talk of the weekend, with emails and phone calls pouring in from parents and community members, all asking about Ray and his music. She wasn't surprised to find Ray already there, in the small practice room where she had first discovered his talent. He wasn't playing, just sitting at the piano, looking thoughtful. "Good morning," Claire said from the doorway. "Mind if I join you?" Ray smiled and moved over on the bench. "How does it feel?" Claire asked as she sat beside him. "Being recognized for who you really are after all this time." Ray considered the question. "Strange," he admitted. "Wonderful. Frightening." "Frightening. Change always is," Ray said. "Even good change." Claire nodded. "The principal wants to talk to you. I think he's going to offer you a position." Ray looked surprised. "Teaching?" "He mentioned something about a resident artist role," Claire said. "Teaching piano, helping with the music program. You'd still need to handle some maintenance work to make it full-time. The budget can only stretch so far. But it would be mostly music." Ray's hands moved to the keys, playing a few soft, thoughtful notes. "And what about you?" he asked. "You took quite a risk, putting the janitor on stage." Claire laughed softly. "Best professional decision I've ever made, as it turns out. But even if it hadn't been..." She paused, trying to find the right words. "Even if the audience hadn't loved you, even if the donors had walked out, it still would have been the right thing to do." Ray looked at her curiously. "Why?" "Because talent and dignity deserve recognition," Claire said simply. "Because I was wrong to judge you by your job title, and because music like yours shouldn't be hidden away in empty rooms after dark." Ray nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that piece you were playing when I first heard you. Your composition. It has something special in it, something honest. Have you written others?" Claire looked down at her hands. "A few, years ago. I set them aside when teaching and administration took over." "Perhaps," Ray said gently. "I'm not the only one who's been hiding their gifts." Claire met his eyes, seeing the challenge there and the understanding. "Perhaps you're right," she acknowledged. Through the open door, they could hear the school coming to life. Students arriving, lockers closing, voices filling the hallways. Monday morning, the start of a new week, and for both of them, the beginning of something else as well. "I should get to my classroom," Claire said, standing. "First period starts soon." Ray nodded, but as she turned to go, he called after her. "Claire!" She looked back. "Yes?" "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing me." Claire smiled. "Play something for your first class today," she suggested. Something they've never heard before. As she walked to her classroom, Claire heard the first notes of Ray's piano following her down the hallway. Not hidden away this time, but flowing freely through the school, touching everyone who listened, changing the very air around them. Some of the students passing by slowed their steps, turning toward the sound with curious expressions. They would soon learn what Claire had discovered, that sometimes the most extraordinary music comes from the most unexpected sources, if only we have the wisdom to listen.